I want to tell you my secret now. I see dead people.
Silent Green is people!
No, I am the Father.
What's in the box? You maniac! You blew it up! Damn you all to hell!
Hello and welcome to Slate Spoiler Specials. I'm Sam Adams, the senior editor at Slate, and today I am joined by Slate's features director, Jeffrey Bloomer. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Sam. I believe this is the first time we've been in the same room since the pandemic began.
I know, it's very exciting. You're all going to hear some serious chemistry here. It's very exciting. So today we are spoiling the movie Halloween Ends, which is the final part of David Gordon Green's Halloween reboot trilogy. There are a lot of nouns to apply to that. This finds us sort of back in the groove with Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, and The Shape, as Michael Myers is often known. But let's start off, Jeff, with what you thought of the end.
So you know that I'm a long-suffering Halloween fan. I'm not quite like going to Michael Myers festivals and doing Reddit cosplay and stuff, but I have seen all 14 movies I believe there are now, some of them more times than I care to admit on the record. And I kind of even I at this point have some franchise fatigue because the last movie, literally they were just introducing new characters every 20 minutes in order for them to be killed off 10 minutes later. And it was so listless. And so going into this movie, I didn't know what to expect. She's already killed Michael Myers once in the past in movies that are ignored by this one. And this movie throws a bit of a curveball. It at least does something different. And I'm grading on a curve, but I appreciated that. We will get into what I mean in a minute. What did you think?
It stinks. I really didn't like this movie at all. This movie, for me, was so bad that it made me like the previous movie in the trilogy, which I also did not like more, because I feel like that at least had ideas, although they were bad ideas. And this one really feels like it has none. It's trying to do something different, which we will get into shortly, but I just don't think it comes off. And then it sort of forgets about that thing like an hour into it. And I just sort of feel no compelling reason for this thing to exist other than that the first one did well and somebody clearly at some point did what if two more. And so they did two more.
I like that we disagree somewhat. I cannot claim that it totally works, but I was delighted that it was not the same movie again.
So we should start by saying, because it's a spoiler special, we're going to spoil the whole thing. And probably the biggest spoiler for this movie is that Michael Myers, I don't think even shows up apart from a sort of flashback to the previous movies for 45 minutes into it, and does not kill somebody until an hour into an hour and 51-minute movie. So it's definitely throwing you for a loop there. This is not a movie that's just what's another excuse for Michael to go around and stab some more babysitters? The opening setup kind of gives us that because it flashes back to Halloween 2019, which is the movie set in the present day, but it goes back a few years. It's Halloween night. This middle-aged couple are going out to a party. They've gotten a last-minute babysitter who's this 21-year-old, sort of, I guess, promising engineering student, and he is called Corey Cunningham, played by Rowan Campbell. And he is just supposed to look after their bratty little boy for an evening. He makes a mistake of showing the kid The Thing for some reason, which is a little, obviously, tip of the hat, in addition to the tip of the checkbook that has allowed all these movies to happen to John Carpenter, who directed that movie in the original Halloween. And basically the kid decides, hey, let's play hide and seek, which is going to end badly. We don't really know how it's going to end badly. He ends up locking Corey in the attic, saying Michael Myers is going to come and get you. We think clearly Michael Myers is probably going to come and get one of them, maybe the kid. But Corey freaks out, starts kicking at the door. This attic, by the way, is up several flights. Somehow this suburban house has 9 flights of stairs in it and a big sort of empty circular stairwell. Corey freaks out, is kicking at the door, finally gets it open. The door swings open, knocks little Billy over the railing. He plummets 115 stories to his death just as his parents are coming back in the door. He's dead. There's blood everywhere for reasons. Corey is also holding a knife at this point. And basically his parents are like, you murderer. And so that's the opening. This child has been killed, not by Michael Myers, but by the fear of Michael Myers, essentially.
Yes, and this little kid earlier in the movie is well, Michael Myers doesn't kill little children, he kills babysitters, and you know from that moment that kid's going to eat it one way or another. And I think that I actually liked this opening sequence. I thought it was like Danny McBride and David Gordon Green, the writer and director, respectively, among others who wrote it. It seems like there's 5 screenwriters on this movie or something, need to stop relying on the trope of a little kid who like is like suddenly extremely profane out of nowhere. But like otherwise, I thought that this sequence was like pretty effective and like surprising. And it should have been the clue right there. I noticed that the opening credits were blue, like a departure from the normal Halloween credits. And that's the other movie that had those was Halloween 3, which Season of the Witch, which is the movie in which famously Michael Myers does not appear. And that doesn't quite what happens in this movie, but it probably is the first clue that things are not going to proceed as we expected.
All right, so let's sort of talk about where we go after that. That's our little 2019 prologue. Then we are sort of up to the present day. Michael Myers is sort of in theory still quote unquote dead as he was at the end of the last movie. We know, of course, that's not going to last. But where are we finding everybody at this point? Judy Greer's still dead. I guess we can reveal that.
Yes, so Judy Greer has played Jamie Lee Curtis's daughter, Laurie Strode's daughter, and she was killed at the end of the last movie after this mob had sort of pummeled Michael to death. And so now we're like a few years ahead, and Laurie Strode has like sort of graduated from being this like post-slasher warrior woman into like kind of like a funny, zany grief like kind of person. I don't know. She like is writing a memoir, and we're hearing in voiceover her describing Michael in sort of like cliched memoir terms. And now she lives with her granddaughter, Allison, and their relationship had been sort of frayed in the other movies, and now it seems like they're doing pretty well. Allison's working as a medical assistant. Laurie Strode just seems to be kind of like a wackadoodle around town. And basically, I had initially thought that we were just going to have like a cold open and not really come back to that character. But earlier in the movie, we see Corey come back, and he is being tormented by some like local teenagers, all of whom you know are going to be absolutely filleted based on how they are treating him. Laurie Strode sort of spots this, and she's like a defender of the bullied, and she goes up and she like kind of scares the kids away after they like knock him down, basically, and then slashes their tires with him, and then brings him to the granddaughter's medical clinic because quite clearly she's up to like kind of matchmaking.
Right. There's a moment where the twist or the sort of development in this movie, in the second one, as you mentioned, was sort of all about like mob justice. It's like the fear of Michael Myers turns the entire town into killers. In this case, the town has sort of weirdly turned on Laurie Strode and like blames her for Michael Myers' existence. They, one of the victims from the last movie, who the daughter of a woman who got, I guess not killed but paralyzed, sort of blames her and is like, it's your boogeyman, you did this. Other people kind of blame Laurie for somehow like leading Michael on until he snapped. Corey at one point says like, well, they couldn't find your boogeyman, so they made me the boogeyman. The word boogeyman gets it a lot in here. And in that scene where he's getting tormented by the teens outside the drugstore, she comes to his rescue, and they sort of like, oh, look, it's Laurie Strode. She's still sort of a famous local celebrity. Don't be the victim of a serial killer in a small town, because everybody will know who you are. It's the psycho and the freak show. And then there's a sort of back and forth over like which one of them is the psycho and which one of the freak show. So I guess if the movie has a thesis, it's that.
The movie comes back to that. And I think that you're right that like it's trying to riff on the last movie's idea about like a grief contagion or like a trauma contagion, basically, like infecting these people and taking it to like the next level, I guess.
Yeah, Laurie uses the word like infection and sickness like in her memoir a lot. There's at the beginning of that scene when they're tormenting Corey, he like has a glass bottle of chocolate milk in his hand for some reason, and he like squeezes it. He's so upset that he squeezes it until it breaks, and it like cuts his hand open, and that's sort of like the something where you get like a little scratch and then you somehow it seems like nothing, but then you get like full body sepsis or something. It's like that's like the entry for the infection that will take him over.
Right. It's a little perhaps on the nose. They go to the clinic and he starts flirting with the granddaughter, and there's instant chemistry there. And you can tell that those two are going to be sort of a driving force in the movie. And the thing is that's going on with them is like pretty quickly after they start seeing each other, I think that Laurie Strode starts to suspect something actually is off with Corey. Does that happen right away, or is it shortly after the first meeting?
At first, she's like, hey, you should meet my granddaughter. And she kind of sets them up and like pushes them together. But then they, I guess they eventually like go out to a Halloween party. It's still a few days before Halloween, but they go out to a costume party at a bar. Corey runs into the mother of the boy he's accidentally killed. Everybody recognizes him as the guy who killed the boy. So he runs into the mother who's just like out, drinking by herself. I guess we sort of intuit that the couple has, split up. They get into a fight. He sort of runs off, and that's when he's kind of really starts to go off the rails. And I think that's when he ends up knifing a homeless man to death under a bridge.
Yes. Basically, what happens is that he's walking home. He storms out of the party because the mother confronts him and calls him a murderer and so on, kind of echoing the way that people have been confronting Laurie Strode. And then they confront him at the edge of a bridge, and through a back and forth in which he finally tries to stand up for himself, they end up throwing him over the bridge. It's not a very steep fall, so he's just knocked out on the ground. But nevertheless, it's kind of an unpleasant scene. And then all of a sudden, this like unseen figure drags him into a storage.
Yeah, we've gotten this ominous shot of this like culvert leading into a hill before. And I think there's even like a POV shot from inside it. So we know like Michael's in, it's been 4 years, but somehow Michael's just been like living in a drainage pipe for 4 years.
Yeah, it's funny because like in the last movie, they were sort of going toward this direction where Michael was superhuman, and it really did not seem like you could kill him anymore. And in this movie, even though he came out of the mob justice in the last one enough to kill Laurie Strode's daughter, he seems to have been badly battered and just like living as like the literal shadow of the town.
And there's a bit, I mean, we're jumping ahead a little bit. Eventually, Corey, who, again, seems like this kind of unimportant character, then sort of ends up like taking on, both literally and figuratively, sort of taking on Michael Myers' mantle. And there's a point at which he sort of, kills somebody accidentally, then he like kills many people on purpose. And there's a point at which he goes to Michael, drags, I guess, his cop ex-boyfriend, like tricks him back into the culvert, sort of lures him down there, and then it holds him up and says to Michael, like, I want to see how you do it. So then he holds him down while Michael, like, stabs him with the iconic knife. And then Corey really decides to commit to the bit at that point. And there's a point at which he says to Michael, like, I need, I came back because I need something that you have. And then there's like this sort of pretty funny, at least in a different context, like long shot through the culvert where you see Michael and Corey sort of like staggering back and forth, like out of frame, like wrestling with each other. They wrestle, they go out of frame, they come back in. It's like this long sort of slapstick bit. And then eventually you find out that Corey has like taken his mask basically to put it on. And obviously like one of the things in the movie is like you never see Michael without the mask. It was never the one thing that will deter him from killing somebody is adjusting his mask when it's almost pulled off. Like it's very important. So the fact that like someone else can take it off and wear it is, there's this scene at the beginning, which sort of made my blood run cold, where I think, Allison or maybe your friend is giving someone a tarot reading and says like, oh, whatever this card is, it means like an old chapter closes and a new one begins. And I'm like, are they setting up like another trilogy? What's going on? But they're just, for the sake of this movie, setting Corey up to be sort of briefly the new shape.
Yeah, and so like you said, they go out of their way to code this kid as like pretty innocent and someone who's been corrupted by the town, the chocolate milk stuff, and he just generally gives kind of a tremulous performance and seems kind of broken up. And he at first kills a homeless man who confronts him sort of by accident, and then it sort of escalates at the same time as he is starting a romance with Allison.
Which goes very fast.
It does, but they really do. I think the two have like decent chemistry, and it was not the least believable part of the movie that the two of them would connect the way they do. But it's really strange. It has a really weird like sort of 70s vibe to it. They're like riding around on this old motorcycle, and like so much of the movie, no one's being killed, and it feels like a much different sort of thing than a Halloween movie in a way that, again, I found not altogether unpleasant, although I imagine most fans and most people with taste will disagree. And it goes on for a while like this, but you do start to see flashes of him kind of having some issues. He confronts a police officer at one point that was also dating Allison in a kind of frightening way. And he's the one that he ends up killing with Michael in the sewer.
And he's got his whole weird like mother thing too.
Oh, yeah. Almost can't even remember that, but he lives with his parents. Corey still lives with his parents, including a very overprotective, shall we say, mother. And if there are tones of her loving her son a little bit too much, of course, later in the movie, they become explicit.
She says at one point, like, just come home late or something. And she's like, well, if you're not a good, like, boys who aren't good don't get any custard.
It's really, it's quite bizarre. But I think that, like, it all pretty much works to build him up to become, he's the main sort of antagonist, if also victim of the movie. And at first he's killing people, including like Allison's boss at the doctor's office. He wears a scarecrow mask to the Halloween party, and at first that becomes his mask. And so he's going around and killing people. in typically brutal fashion. Although this movie, I would say, was just a touch less gory than the last one until the end.
I mean, I'm not like a horror fan of the sort that is like, will, ask like, what are the kills in the movie or something. But I will say, just from that point of view, the kills in this movie are a lot less gory, but also like less inventive than the previous. I think the previous movie was the one where somebody gets like stabbed to death with like a newel post from a staircase or something like that. And this is just, he runs somebody over with a truck at one point.
I mean, he blowtorches people. He does some things in this.
Yeah.
I'm not what are the kills? Are the kills gruesome enough person either? And so I appreciated this movie was a little bit less sadistic. So we are getting very rapidly toward the ending because, like we say, though, this movie is fairly long. Not a ton happens in it. But I guess we should take a moment and come back to get to that.
The Slate Spoiler Special is brought to you by Progressive. Are you thinking more about how to tighten up your budget these days? Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations. Are you feeling a little anxious and overwhelmed? These feelings can make it hard to shift gears and get in the mood. With Dipsea, you can focus just on what makes you feel good. Dipsea is an app full of hundreds of short, sexy audio stories designed by women for women. They bring scenarios to life with immersive soundscapes and characters, no matter who you're into or what turns you on. Find stories about that intriguing coworker with a British accent or hooking up with your hot yoga instructor. Hear the sexy voices of Sarunas J. Jackson, Ira Fightmaster, Luke Cook, and many others in stories like you've never heard before. New content is released every week, so in between listening to your favorite stories again and again, you can always find something new to explore. Dipsea also has sleep stories, wellness sessions, and now they also offer written stories. It's your go-to place to spice up your me time, explore your fantasies, or heat things up with a partner. For listeners of the show, Dipsea is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/spoiler. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to dipseastories.com/spoiler. That's dipseastories.com/spoiler.
And we're back. So we are approaching the ends of Halloween Ends. How do we end up with sort of the final confrontation, which, does eventually involve Michael Myers?
So, yes, Michael Myers does show up in the movie in which is supposed to be the last movie in which he appears, which it certainly won't be. As we mentioned earlier, Laurie Strode at some point sees the evil in Corey and realizes that something's going on with him and starts warning Allison about him and saying she needs to stay away from him. There's a really bizarre scene in which Corey falls asleep in the abandoned house where he accidentally killed the kid. And Laurie Strode is just there, with a chair against the wall, banging the chair against the wall. Yeah. I don't even remember what she says, but it's something like, I know what you are. I know what you're doing.
She does a lot of talking about the nature of evil, and there's outside evil and inside evil, and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, let it be said that Jamie Lee Curtis has a lot of fun with her last hurrah as this character. If nothing else, she's a real joy to watch. So anyway, she's confronting this kid and also Allison about being with him because they're basically planning to run away together, this kid and Allison, Corey. And the issue is that he also just keeps absolutely massacring people, and so it's obviously not going to work out.
Including, we should say, all the teens from that gas station. So,
yes.
Of course, are all brutally eviscerated in one way or another.
Yes, the sequence eventually it comes back to, we haven't really talked about it, but he works at this sort of car repair shop that's in a junkyard. They all end up there with the teens, and he does dispatch them all in classic horror movie, who's the real villain sort of situation. So anyway, we're basically now finally at this ending moment where he's stolen Michael Myers' mask and sort of kind of knocked him on the ground and is kind of taking up the mantle in a way that is certainly disrespecting the villain. We kind of get the sense that he's had enough of this kid and enough of being pushed around. And so we end up back. We know that a confrontation is going to happen between Laurie Strode and Corey to start out with. Do you want to take us into that?
Yeah, sure. So we one of the threads that's running through this movie is Laurie sort of finishing her memoir that she's been working on. So she finally finishes it, and then she's sitting upstairs at her desk in her little writing nook, picks up the phone and says, I want to report a suicide. hangs up the phone, pulls out this gun. We think, oh no, she's overcome by grief. I mean, the movie has not really set us up to believe this at all, but it's like, well, a lot of arbitrary things have happened in this. Maybe they're just going to have Laurie kill herself. So it cuts away. We hear a gunshot. We see this splat come out of the door. Then in comes Corey. And pan back to the mantelpiece where Laurie has actually just shot a pumpkin. Call back to the credits of the original and, most of the movie since. And so then they have, she's just like, oh, you idiot. You didn't really think I would kill myself. She shoots him, I think, twice and then puts the rest of the bullets into the wall for some reason. But he's at this point, lying there sort of bleeding out. We think briefly dead at the bottom of her stairs. And then, of course, we see a shape move in the background.
So earlier in the movie, when Laurie had confronted Corey said something like, if I can't have Allison, no one will. Yeah. There's a lot of classic abuser language going on in the movie, and it's all about the cycle of trauma, et cetera, that this movie's sort of trying to toy with, if not very convincingly. And then in this scene, as they're on the ground, does Michael confront them while he's still alive?
Yeah, we think he's dead, but then so Laurie realizes that, she sees like a curtain billowing and she's like, she knows Michael's in the house because she has, like Michael Dar at this point. So he goes up to Corey. Michael goes to pick up the knife, which Corey's left on the floor, and Corey grabs his arm when he does it. So he's not dead, like a little sort of end of Carrie jump scare there. They struggle with it for a little bit, and then Michael just kind of grabs his head and breaks his neck.
Oh, yes, that's right. Because what I was thinking of is that earlier in the scene, he stabs himself in the neck and says, so he repeats the line about if no one can have her and then stabs himself somehow. Yes. That's supposed to make sense. Okay, right. And then Michael comes and Michael, dispatches him, takes the mask back. And so begins what the trailers for this movie sort of presented it as being a confrontation between the two of them once again. And it goes through a lot of weird sort of like volleying around the house. Like they at one point he takes her hand and puts in the garbage disposal and tries to turn it on, which is itself a callback to the previous Halloween anniversary sequel in which she decapitates Michael Myers. And you're going into this movie, and this movie ignores the events of anything after Halloween 2, if you don't recall. So that's why that kind of makes sense that she's already killed him before. And in fact, he's also killed her. But I think in the scene, you sort of what can she possibly do to Michael that would be more final than decapitating him? And this movie does come up with an answer. But first we're sort of in the kitchen and she's kind of crucifying him. She puts knives through both of his hands and kind of has them open on the thing. She can really handle big game. And Michael, she gets him down. She seems to cut one of his arteries at first, and then she slices his throat, and then for good measure, she slits his wrists the right way, as the movies have taught me. It's a very long and bizarre sequence that's almost a little bit tender in a weird way.
Yeah, and he comes back, after you think he's dead at one point and grabs her around the throat and is choking her out. And then Allison comes back in, sees Corey dead, but, comes around to her mom's side eventually.
Yeah, grandma, yeah.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
At first, she's horribly mad that Laurie Strode has killed Corey, but later on, she sort of seems to have come around to it, of being the right thing, and realizing that Laurie was right. But in a very weird sequence that was kind of fun almost, they take Michael and they decide that he's not dead enough yet. So they strap his body on top of a car, I believe. Yes, yep. And the entire townspeople form a line as if they're going to a mass, a giant funeral in the middle of the night. And they drive out to the junkyard where, Corey killed all the teens.
They feed him into what I believe, if I remember my Stephen King correctly, is called a mangler.
They put his body in there and they really make pulp out of him. And, a decapitation, it's very 90s compared to this. It is a very thorough evisceration.
You see his little head get sort of squished up and mashed in the gears of this thing. He's really most sincerely dead at this point.
Yeah, I think that it's meant to be a weirdly sort of sweet moment, even though it's incredibly gruesome. So this movie sort of, as Sam alluded to earlier, it does something different that he thinks is bad and I think is okay, but it also wants to have this final climactic moment with Michael too, in a way that tonally feels a little bit off.
Let's talk about how it brings the whole trilogy and this reboot cycle to a close, but let's take a break first.
I have a special announcement for you today. For a limited time, you can get 6 months of Slate Plus for just $29. That's 50% off. As a member, you'll get no ads on any of our podcasts, unlimited reading on the Slate site, and member-exclusive episodes and segments from other shows like Slow Burn, Amicus, Political Gabfest, and more. Slate's podcasts cover major news events, from elections to social issues to historic court decisions. Our shows also discuss what makes a song a smash, analyze what's going viral, and decode cultural mysteries. If we become part of your listening routines, we ask that you support our work by joining Slate Plus. Sign up for Slate Plus now at slate.com/spoiler+ to access all of Slate's content and support our work. Again, that's just $29 for 6 months through October 28th. So sign up now at slate.com/spoiler+.
It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card is designed to help you pay less interest. Unlike other cards, it estimates how much interest you'll owe and suggests moves to help you pay off your balance faster. All so you can keep more of your money. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval, interest estimates on the payment wheel are illustrative only and may not fully reflect actual interest charges on your account. Estimates are based on your posted account balance at the time of the estimate and do not include pending transactions or any other purchases you may make before the end of the billing period.
Remember the days before streaming services, when you could come home from high school and it was only a few hours until that TV show that everyone was watching was going to come on? Your friends were on their way over for the watch party and the smell of popcorn filled the room. Well, in 1999, that show was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In the new podcast from Wondery, The Rewatcher, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we are taking it back to 1999. Get out your knee-high boots and paste that poster of Angel on the wall. It is time to re-enter the Buffyverse. Join Morbid co-hosts Ash and Elena as they slay their way through Buffy's drama, action, and romance episode by episode. Enter the Buffyverse with Elena and Ash. Listen to Rewatcher, Buffy the Vampire Slayer on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app.
And we're back. So we've been talking about Halloween Ends, how it does bring this whole new trilogy to a close. I'm sure there will be, more Halloween movies in another 10 or 5 or 3 years, whenever the IP needs to be revived. But as a fan of the series like this, or a devotee of the series up to this point, how did you feel about this as a kind of at least temporary close to the cycle?
I mean, I think it is a far less satisfying movie than Halloween H2O. It's just like from the late 90s, and it's like an 80-minute sort of throwaway slasher kind of, but it like is a taut little movie in which she confronts Michael and decapitates him, like I said. And it's like, so I guess they just like realized they couldn't do that movie again and wanted to do something different, which, as I said, I appreciate. I can't imagine that fans of the series and of this character are going to take very kindly to how they just like really like let this kid walk all over him and make him into this weak, feeble little thing only for Laurie Strode to feed him to a mangler. But I thought it was solid. It caught me by surprise. I don't know that the movie makes any sense or works at all, but that is like fine. A lot of these movies do not. But that said, I thought it was at least a shot at something vaguely original. In that way, I thought it was satisfying.
Yeah, I've already made my feelings about it clear, and I'd rather end on your up note. And that is our show, so please subscribe to the Slate Spoiler Special podcast feed. And if you like the show, please rate and review it in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for movies or TV shows we should spoil, or if you have any other feedback you'd like to share, please send it to spoilers@slate.com. Our producer today is Kristie Taiwo-Makanjuola. Alicia Montgomery is the Vice President of Audio at Slate. For Jeffrey Bloomer, I'm Sam Adams. Thank you for listening.